today we're going to focus on approaches to team science and team research, where particularly there has been a profound impact from what may start off as relatively fundamental or basic research, but be rapidly translated. So we have a couple of great keynote speakers in Professor Richard Mitchell-Moore from UC Davis and Professor Sylvia Wilson-Thomas from University of South Florida.
Obviously, at the onset of the pandemic, universities were challenged with how to respond. And the pandemic really represented a global challenge that universities, I think, are really uniquely suited to address. So universities possess extensive intellectual capital and infrastructure really across wide disciplines that allow us to be able to coordinate efforts and address on a relatively fast time scale, as we've already seen, when we have these kinds of challenges.
My colleague, Dr. Ana Lucia Cordova-Credos now. Ana Lucia is our Strategic Initiatives Manager in the Office of Research, and she's just going to provide a short snippet of some of the efforts that we've been making in a more slightly traditional way, I guess, in trying to keep the research community together and stimulate activity related to COVID-19.
We were faced with all these challenges. How do we contribute to a solution? How do we maintain research continuity that now that our researchers cannot, a lot of them cannot come into their labs? What do we need to support the COVID-19 and pandemic related research across all disciplines? Because we are a campus that has one of each. As I tell people, it's a strength, but it can also be a challenge. So we have people in the social sciences and humanities, and we have people like Richard who are in the middle of the fray. So how do we equally support everyone? How do we encourage people to embrace all of these opportunities for funding so that they can continue doing work? And how do we make sure our researchers actually have access to all the information and the resources that they need? So in summary, what do we do as the support and staff team to make sure our researchers are successful and that they can continue to thrive in these challenging circumstances? We're hoping that what we learned in this rapid response to this research challenge that the pandemic presented is something that we can now take a look back and build into a toolbox that we can use to then apply to other research challenges as they come up for our campus, but also for other research institutions where might be useful.
I'm going to do a really quick overview of the response of the University of South Florida. I have a slide on the background that shows our pandemic response research network. Obviously, at the onset of the pandemic, universities were challenged with how to respond. So at the University of South Florida, the Vice President of Research convened a task force. So we started by putting together a task force of roughly 40 faculty members from all over the institution, representing nearly all of our colleges, to really take a look at where are our strengths and where is our physical infrastructure that could be deployed to address various aspects of the pandemic, which includes both mitigation and the consequences. And the way our network is set up is that each of these hubs has a hub coordinator or set of coordinators. And these are faculty members that have research interests in these areas. And then underneath, if you could look actually underneath each one of these hubs are sets of faculty clusters, and not just faculty clusters. There's community partners and there's industry components as well that are all brought together to tackle the problems. And when you look at this and kind of deconstruct it, this really is HIBAR. We're bringing in multiple stakeholders to tackle a specific problem. That's a global problem. It's a community problem, and to do it on rapid timescales. And one of the concepts of HIBAR is that we really need to bring the right stakeholders together to accelerate the translation from the basic research to the translation. So in deconstructing something like our HIBAR network, it really, or our pandemic network, it really is a HIBAR approach. We now kind of know what kind of HIBAR elements we can put together to make these kinds of networks to actually tackle other global problems. And the pandemic really showed us what we are capable of.
Looking at early detection of disease outbreaks using self-organizing patterns. And this was an interdisciplinary effort across electrical engineering, myself, who looks at sensor data, and computer science and engineering, our industry partners, Graphaware and Graphable, and also our consultant from internal medicine. The beginning of the outbreak, we wanted to understand the symptoms and the transmission, but we were doing it looking at proximity data, right? Geographical proximity data, and trying to relate the outbreak and trying to track the outbreak based on this geographical proximity data.
This effort has gotten quite a lot of national media attention, New York Times, multiple TV stations as well. So rightfully so, an amazing example of moving a research concept and idea, translating it amazingly.
This was a massive effort from all across campus. There was tremendous buy-in by the administration. If you look here, there's people in purchasing, people in HR, people in health and safety, communications, and then the Genome Center, we were able to repurpose a lot of people. And then the art kiosk had a staff of 60, 2 teams that were coming in, non-overlapping. Many of them repurposed from housing and dining. We also had students working as part of their experience. And then data management, of course, is really important. And then clinical oversight, we have the MDs very closely involved to roll out this information. You have to be prepared to work outside your comfort zone. You know, we did not have experience in high throughput testing. Certainly very few people had on the scale that we're now doing it. This was supported by a totally committed administration. The message was get it done, and things that would normally take weeks took days, things that could take days took hours. And this was really key to rolling this out. What was remarkable was how fast the university could respond. When we said, okay, make it happen, and directions came right from the top, make it happen. And I say, you know, we were purchasing the equipment in a matter of days rather than weeks. We needed to hire people to get that through the system. Would have normally taken 2 or 3 weeks. It took 2 or 3 days. You know, to get approval for something that normally would take 4 or 5 days happened in hours. And the frustrating thing is, why the hell can't we work like this all the time? You know? And I know it got prioritized over other things, but it shows what's possible if people want to make it happen.
We took a lot of lessons that we learned from the PRN about how to engage with our communities first. And one of the really interesting observations that came out of our discussions about that is that universities have had a tendency in the past to collect research areas and then go to the community and say, do we do anything that will help you? And it may or may not. What we're not asking the community is, where do you need help? And we'll build some networks around to help you around a problem you need to solve. And in these kind of social justice networks, that's the approach we're taking now, which is really a paradigm shift from the way we have traditionally done things.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, you get the community engaged from the beginning and you find the problem they need to solve. Although we do outstanding research and scholarship in all of our universities, we don't always take the approach of, well, what does my community need? So I think there's a huge opportunity here to now shift the way we think about things in terms of engaging either industry partners, our local communities and corporations at the beginning. And I think with the HIBAR, I think that's really something that's exciting because in our approach, this network approach, the idea is we build these hubs around the problem. We already have a lot of faculty here doing all kinds of things, but we identify a problem, we build the hub around the problem, bring the faculty clusters, partners around the problem, and then that's how we tackle the problems.
The dynamics that right in our team meetings, when you have a medical doctor and an electrical engineer having a conversation, it's almost like we have to have tutorials going both ways, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, understanding the terms and being able to identify what the clear research focus is and what the high level objective is. And I think that was the key thing. We all agreed, okay, how can we effectively use this tool to make an impact on decisions, right? And some empowered decision making that happens in society.
I think one of the things that we should think about is one of the biggest challenges of our times, probably more so than COVID, is climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we take the lessons from because people have really got behind, let's deal with the pandemic.
Yeah.
But if we don't deal with climate change,
forget about
we might
it.
as well not have dealt with the pandemic. You know?
Yeah.